Hey Derp, how's it going? I just managed to spill hot tea all over myself. On the plus side, I missed any important electronics. Hey Wade, how's it going? Hey, Shield Wall of Dragons, not much. Just we're gonna read some Aesop's Fables, and I'm cleaning up a small tea spill really quick. Again, I'm just happy I missed any electronics. Ah. Hey Drama Goblin. Don't worry about it, Wade. You're playing the Genshin and distressing from my head thoughts. The head thoughts are always the evil ones. I'm so glad this is not a cult because I already have there is no cult. The rituals and everything are just part of our voluntary association, don't you know? All right. Where'd my mouse go? Oh, right. I should probably wipe my mouse. I think I got tea on. Audio problems. I'm coming in and out. Is that better now that I'm actually just sitting at the mount? I probably need to get a new cable for this thing. I was turning my head back and forth, so that might have been part of it. But let me know if that's better. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? I think I need to get a new cable, but I also need to talk directly into the mic. Combination of those things, don't you know? And apparently I'm very Midwestern tonight. Alrighty. Who's ready for some short stories with some morals at the end, huh? Oh, don't you know? Yep. You betcha. I did manage to get some light reading done today. I got a trashy romance novel on Kindle. Ooh. I'm not gonna lie. There was a short period of time where those stupid they have those apps with those stupid werewolf stories on them. There were like 2 of those I really enjoyed. They were terrible. I mean, awful, 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 awful books. But at the same time, it was like watching a train wreck. I couldn't not watch. For some of them, Shield Wall, yes, that is in fact the moral. However, that is the other book. Tonight we are going to focus more on Aesop and the type of fables that you can carry, or the type of morals that you can carry into your everyday life that teach you good from bad and right from wrong and up from down and that kind of shit. Next week we will be reading The Curse of Yig. That one will probably lead to some madness and possibly a sore throat. However, for tonight, the story's much shorter. We need one that ends with Cthulhu gazing at the depths of human depravity, recoils into the ocean, rampant insanity. No, I hate to tell you this, but Cthulhu will always win in the insanity market, even as our current world continues to drive itself further and further down the path. However, let's start with the two travelers of Aesop's Fables. As two men were traveling through a wood, one of them took up an axe which he saw lying on the ground. "Look here," he said to his companion, "I have found an axe." "Don't say I have found it," replied the other, "but we have found it. As we are companions, we ought to share it between us." The first would not, however, consent. They had not gone far when they heard the owner of the axe calling after them in a great passion. "We are in for it," said he who had the axe. "Nay," answered the other, "say I am in for it, not we. You would not let me share the prize, and I am not going to share the danger." The moral of the story is, he who shares the danger ought to share the prize. Hey, Mephisto. It's not communism. It is, it's a fact. If someone is going to share in the prize, then they should actually share in the danger. If you don't, it's not communism. Well, I'm not going to explain that right now. Mercury and the Woodman. The good old, what do you mean we? Exactly. Mercury and the Woodman. A man felling a tree on the bank of a river by chance let his axe slip from his hand. It dropped into the water and sank to the bottom. In great distress at the loss of his tool, he sat down on the bank and grieved bitterly when Mercury appeared and asked him what was the matter. Having heard the man's story, he dived to the bottom of the river and, bringing up a golden axe, offered it to him. "That is not mine," said the woodman. He refused to take it. Mercury dived a second time and brought up a silver one. "That is not mine either," said the man. Mercury dived a third time and brought up the axe that the man had lost, and this one he took with great joy and thankfulness. "Thou hadst been so truthful," said Mercury, pleased with his honesty, "that I shall give thee not only thine own axe, but also those of gold and silver." The woodman told this adventure to his mate, and one of them at once set off for the river and let his axe fall in on purpose. He then began to lament the loss with a loud voice. Mercury appeared, as before, and demanded the cause of his grief. After hearing the man's account, he dived and brought up a golden axe and asked if that were his. "Yes, yes," said the covetous fellow, and greedily attempted to snatch it. "Dost thou think to deceive one who sees thy heart?" said Mercury sternly. And he not only declined to give his golden axe to him, but refused to let him have his own again. The moral of the story is, dishonesty overreaches itself. Exactly, drama goblin. Exactly. The Lion and the Asses and Hares. Okay, so here we got some hairy asses. Upon the breaking out of a war between the birds and the beasts, the lion summoned all of his subjects to appear in arms at a certain time and place, and upon pain of his high displeasure. A number of hares and asses made their appearance on the field. Several of the commanders were for turning them off as creatures utterly unfit for service. "Do not be too hasty," said the lion. "The asses will do well for trumpeters, and the hares will make excellent messengers." The moral of the story is, everything has its use. The Fox and the Mask. A fox one day, rummaging in the house of an actor, came across a very beautiful mask. Putting his paw on the forehead, he said, "What a handsome face we have here. It's a pity that it should want for brains." The moral of the story is beauty without brains, nothing gains. It's true. The Fowler and the Blackbird. A fowler setting his nets in order was curiously watched by a blackbird, who could not forbear coming and asking the man civilly what he was about. I am making a nice little house for such as you, answered the fowler, and putting into it food and all manner of useful things. He then departed and hid himself. The blackbird, believing his words, came into the nets and was taken. If your house is built for treachery, said he to the man, I hope it will have few inhabitants. The moral of the story is dishonest rulers overthrow the state. I mean, we really do need to overthrow the state, but that's a separate issue. There are many levels to stupid. Hey, Triple Bait. There are many levels to stupid robust. Well, yes, they are indeed not as intelligent as some of the normal folk. They're apparently intelligent enough to do quite well. Though in many cases, they are actually held up by more intelligent people. The cats and the mice. Oh, shit. You're out of the roll. Thank you for the raid. I haven't had one of those in a long time. It's great to see you guys. We're reading Aesop's Fables for the record, so stick around and enjoy some stories. They are, but yes, Drama Goblin. They are very short and to the point is the best way to put it, because that's what they're for. They tell a direct story, and some of them are longer than others. Which this one is slightly longer. The cats and the mice. In former time, hold on. This thing keeps trying to catch in my throat. In former times, a fierce and lasting war raged between the cats and the mice, in which, time after time, the latter had to fly. One day, when the mice in council were discussing the cause of their ill luck, the general opinion seemed to be that it was the difficulty of knowing, in the heat of conflict, who were their leaders that led to their defeat and utter rout. So it was decided that, in the future, each captain should have his head decorated with some thin straws, so that all the mice would then know to whom they were to look for orders. After the mice had drilled and disciplined their numbers, they once more gave battle to the cats. But again they met with no better success, being utterly routed. The greater party reached their holes in safety, but the captains were prevented by their strange headgear from entering their retreats, and fell prey to their cruel pursuers. The moral of the story is, those who have the greatest honor have the greatest danger. The other part of it is, they're very old, so they're not really told in the same type of speak we use today, obviously. Hey, Sleazy, how's it going? The language and sentence structures are much changed. The Angler and the Little Fish. A fisherman who had caught a very small fish was about to throw him into his basket. The little fellow, gasping, pleaded thus for his life. What? You are never going to grow? You are never going to keep such a minnow as I, not 1/4 grown? 50 like me wouldn't make a decent dish. Do throw me back, and come back and catch me when I am bigger. It is all very well to say, catch me again, my little fellow, replied the man. But you know you'll make yourself very scarce in the future. You're big enough now to make one in a frying pan, so in you go. The moral of the story is no time like the present. The Horse and the Hog. A hog that was lazily lying in the sun saw a war horse advancing on his way to the battlefield. The war horse was gaily oh my god, this is a new word for me. Caparisoned and proudly spurned the ground, as if impatient to charge the enemy. The hog half lifted his head and, grunting, said to him, "What a fool you are to be so ready to rush to your death." "Your speech," replied the horse, "fits well a vile animal that only lives to get fat and be killed by the knife. If I die on the field, I die where duty calls me, and I shall leave the memory of a good name behind." The moral of the story is, 'tis not death, but the manner of it which is important. The gardener and his landlord. A simple sort of gardener, who rented a cottage and small garden on the outskirts of a park belonging to a great squire, was much annoyed at the havoc that a certain hare made with his choice and delicate young vegetables. So off went the man one morning to complain to the squire. "This hare," he said, "laughs at all snares. He has a charm that keeps off all the sticks and stones that I throw at him. In plain truth, I believe he is no hare at all, but a wizard in disguise." "Nay, were he the father of all wizards," replied the squire, who was a great hunter, "my dogs will make short work with him. We'll come tomorrow and see about it." The next morning, the squire, with his pack of hounds and a score of friends and huntsmen and others. Okay, yeah, I skipped a word. Very important. The next morning came the squire with his pack of hounds and a score of friends, huntsmen and others. The gardener was at breakfast and felt bound to ask them to partake. They did so and made great inroads upon his stores of provisions. "Now let us beat for the hare," cried the squire, and the huntsmen blew their horns with deafening noise, and the dogs flew here and there in search of the hare, who was soon started from under a big cabbage where he'd gone for shelter. Across the garden ran the hare, and after him went the dogs. Alas for the beds, the frames, the flowers. Through the hedge went the hare, and over the bed, and through the hedge after him went the squire, the friends, the huntsmen, the horses, and all. A wreck indeed did the place look when they were gone. "Ah," cried the gardener, "fool that I was to go to the grate for help. Here is more damage done in half an hour than all the hares in the province would have made in a year." The moral of the story is, do not ask others to do what you can do for yourself. The Boy and the Nettle. A boy was stung by a nettle. He ran home and told his mother, saying, "Although it pains me so much, I did but touch it ever so gently." "That's what caused it to sting you," replied his mother. "The next time you touch a nettle, grasp it boldly, and it will be soft as silk to your hand, and not hurt you in the least." The moral of the story is, whatever you do, do with all your might. The Lion and the Four Bulls. 4 bulls were such great friends that they always kept together when feeding. A lion watched them for many days with longing eyes, but never being able to find one apart from the rest, was afraid to attack them. He at length succeeded in awakening jealousy among them, which finally became hatred, and they strayed off at some distance from each other. The lion then fell upon them singly and killed them all. The moral of the story is, there is strength in unity. The Horse and the Groom. A dishonest groom regularly used to sell a good half of the measure of oats that was daily allowed for a horse, the care of which was entrusted to him. He would, however, keep currying the animal for hours together to make him appear in good condition. The horse naturally resented this treatment. "If you really wish me to look sleek," he said, "in the future, give me half the currying and twice as much of the food." The moral of the story is, there is no parleying with the dishonest. The Old Woman and the Cask. An old woman found an empty cask which had lately been full of prime old wine, and which still retained the smell of its former contents. She greedily placed it several times to her nose, and sniffing it with a sigh said, "Oh, most delicious! How nice must the wine itself have been when it leaves so sweet a perfume." The moral of the story is the memory of a good deed lives on. It's funny how some of these morals lead to interesting results, you know? Like, is just being a really good wine a good deed? Apparently it is. The Wolf and the Fox. The wolves and foxes once selected one of their number to be their ruler. The wolf that was chosen was a plausible, smooth-spoken rascal, and on a very early day he addressed an assembly of his subjects as follows. "One thing," he said, "is of such vital importance and will tend so much to our general welfare that I cannot impress it too strongly upon your attention. Nothing cherishes true brotherly feeling and promotes the general good so much as the suppression of all selfishness. Let each one of you, then, share with any hungry brother who may be near, whatever in hunting may fall to your lot." "Hear, hear," cried a fox, who had listened to the speech. "And of course, you yourself will begin with the fat sheep that you hid yesterday in the corner of your lair." The moral of the story is practice what you preach. I think it was the one story. I think it's very metaphorical, is what they were going for there, which is beyond so many people today. Good night, Shield Wall. Thanks for popping by. The Cat and the Sparrows. A great friendship once existed between a sparrow and a cat, to whom, when quite a kitten, the bird had been given. When they were playing together, the bold sparrow would often fly into little mimic rages and peck the cat with his bill, while Pussy would beat him off with only half-open claws. And though this sport would often wax warm, there was never real anger between them. It happened, however, that the bird made the acquaintance of another sparrow, and being both of them saucy fellows, they soon fell out and quarreled in earnest. The little friend of the cat in these fights generally fared the worst, and one day he came trembling all over with passion and besought the cat to avenge his wrongs for him. Pussy thereupon pounced on the offending stranger and speedily crunched him up and swallowed him. "I had no idea before that sparrows were so nice," said the cat to herself, for her blood was now stirred, and as quick as though her little playmate was seized and sent to join his enemy. The moral of the story is trouble is more easily started than stopped. Give something a taste of blood and it eventually want yours. The Dog in the Manger. A dog was lying in a manger full of hay. An ox, being hungry, came near and was going to eat of the hay. The dog, getting up and snarling at him, would not let him touch it. "Surly creature," said the ox, "you cannot eat the hay yourself, and yet you will let no one else have any." The moral of the story is do not begrudge others what you yourself cannot enjoy. Oh, if that's not a lesson people need to learn. The Wolves and the Sheep. Once upon a time, the wolves sent an embassy to the sheep, desiring that there may be lasting peace between them. "Why," said the messengers, "should we be forever at war? These wicked dogs are the cause of it all. They are always barking at us and making us mad. Now, if you'll give up your dogs, we will send you our children as hostages in peace." The silly sheep agreed to the proposal and dismissed the dogs. The wolves gave up their whelps, but the young wolves cried for their mothers, and the wolves then claimed that the peace had been broken and set upon the sheep, who, deprived of their defenses, the dogs could make no resistance, but fell an easy prey to their enemies. The moral of the story is make no truce with a sworn enemy. Hey, Kaser, how's it been? Hey, it's been a while. I'm glad your tentacles don't tend attentively. You tried, Kaser. And yes, it's been quite a while. It's good to see you. The Frog and the Mouse. A frog and a mouse, who had long been rivals for the sovereignty of a certain marsh, and had many a skirmish and running fight together, agreed one day to settle the matter once and for all by a fair and open combat. They met, and each, armed with the point of a bulrush for a spear, was ready to fight to the death. The combat began in earnest, and there was no knowing how it might have ended, had not a kite, seeing them from afar, pounced down and carried off both heroes in her talons. The moral of the story is peace brings security. The Old Man and Death. A poor and toil-worn peasant, bent with years and groaning beneath the weight of a heavy bundle of sticks of firewood which he carried, sought, weary and sore-footed, on a long and dusty road to gain his distant cottage. Unable to bear the weight of his burden any longer, he let it fall by the roadside, and sitting down upon it, lamented his hard fate. What pleasure had he known since he first drew breath in this sad world? From dusk to dawn, one round of his ill-requited toil. At home, empty cupboards, a discontent wife, and disobedient children. He called on death to free him from his troubles. At once, the king of terrors stood before him and asked him what he wanted. Awed at the ghastly presence, the old man stammered, "I only wanted you to help me put this bundle of sticks on my shoulder again." The moral of the story is what is desired in fancy is often regretted in reality. The bees, the drones, and the wasp. A party of drones got into a hive and, laying claim to the honey and comb which they found there, tried to force the bees to quit. The bees, however, made a sturdy resistance. Finally, the drones agreed to their proposal that the dispute should be referred for judgment to the wasp. The wasp, pretending it was a hard matter to decide, directed both parties to make and fill some comb before him in court, so that he might see whose production most resembled the property in dispute. The bees at once sent to work, but the drone refused the trial. The verdict was given by Judge Wasp in favor of the bees. The moral of the story is a tree is known by its fruit. Realistically, whatever. That one's kind of weird. The Wolf and the Kid. And in this case, by kid, they don't mean child, they mean a young goat. A wolf spied a kid that had strayed to a distance from the herd and pursued him. The kid, finding that he could not escape, waited till the wolf came up, and then, assuming a cheerful tone, said, "I see clearly enough that I must be eaten, but I would fain die as pleasantly as I can. Give me, therefore, a few notes of the pipe that you play so well before I go to destruction." It seemed that the wolf was of a musical turn, and always carried his pipe with him. Flattered by the kid's compliment, the wolf played and the kid danced, until the noise of the pipe brought the dogs to the spot. The wolf hastily fled, saying, "This is what comes when people will go meddling out of their profession. My business was to play the butcher, not the piper." The moral of the story is stick to your task. Judge Waspers of the People's Steward. Never heard some of these. Many are included in Young Children's Tales collections. Oh yeah, this is an entire book of Aesop's Fables that I'm reading. So there are quite a lot of them, believe it or not. Jupiter's two wallets. When Jupiter made man, he gave him two wallets, one for his neighbor's faults and the other for his own. He then threw them over the man's shoulder so that one hung in front and the other hung behind. The man kept the one in front for his neighbor's faults and the one behind for his own, so that While the first was always under his nose, it took some pains to see the latter. This custom, which began thus early, is not quite unknown at the present day. The moral of the story is one can always see his neighbor's faults eat more easily than his own. Two travelers of differing humors. There were two men of very differing humors together upon a journey. One went despondingly on, with 1,000 cares and troubles in his head, exclaiming every now and then, "Whatever shall I do to live?" The other jogged merrily along, determined to keep a good heart, do his best, and leave the issues to fortune. "How can you be so merry?" said the sorrowful plotter. "As I am a sinner, my heart is ready to break, for fear I should want bread." "Tut, man," said the other, "there's enough bread to spare for all of us." Presently, the grumbler had another heavy thought that made him groan aloud. "What a dreadful thing it would be if I were struck blind," said he, "and he must needs walk on ahead with his eyes shut, to try how it would seem if that misfortune should befall him." His fellow traveler, coming after him, picked up a purse of gold which the other, having his eyes shut, had not perceived, and thus he was punished for his mistrust, for the purse had been his, if he had not first willingly put it out of his power to see it. The moral of the story is fortune helps those who help themselves. The Cock and the Fox. One bright morning, a cock perched among the branches of a lofty tree, crowed loud and long. I really hate it when I do that. There really is a rhythm to reading these, and if you don't read the whole sentence, you can throw the rhythm off and change the entire meaning of the sentence. It's very irritating. One bright spring morning, a cock, perched among the branches of a lofty tree, crowed long and loud. The shrillness of his voice echoed through the wood, and the well-known note brought a fox, who was prowling in quest of prey, to the spot. The fox, seeing that the cock was at a great height, set his wits to work to find some way of bringing him down. He saluted the bird in his mildest voice and said, "Have you not heard, cousin, of the proclamation of peace and harmony among all kinds of beasts and birds? We are no longer to prey upon and devour one another, but love and friendship are to be the order of the day. Do come down, and we will talk over this great news at our leisure." The cock, who knew that the fox was only at his old tricks, pretended to be watching something in the distance. Finally, the fox asked what it was he was looking at so earnestly. "Why," said the cock, "I think I see a pack of hounds yonder." "Oh, then," said the fox, your humble servant I must be gone." "Nay, cousin," said the cock, "pray do not go. I am just coming down. You are surely not afraid of dogs in these peaceable times." "No, no," said the fox, "but 10 to 1 they have not heard of the proclamation yet." The moral of the story is 'tis a poor rule that will not work both ways. So was birds warring with other animals just like a meme back then? You could say so. It was more of an explanation of the order of the world than a meme. They really didn't have time for memeing. But there's a lot of anthropomorphized animals in these stories. The cobbler turned doctor. A very unskilled cobbler, finding himself unable to make a living at his trade, gave up mending boots and took to doctoring instead. He gave out that he had the secret of a universal antidote against all poisons, and acquired no small reputation, thanks to his talent for puffing himself. One day, however, he fell very ill, and the king of the country bethought him that he would test the value of his remedy. Calling, therefore, for a cup, he poured out a dose of the antidote and, under pretense of mixing poison with it, added a little water and commanded him to drink it. Terrified by the fear of being poisoned, the cobbler confessed that he knew nothing about medicine and that his antidote was worthless. Then the king summoned his subjects and addressed them as follows: "What folly could be greater than yours? Here is the cobbler to whom no one will send his boots to be mended, and yet you have not hesitated to entrust him with your lives." The moral of the story is it is not wise to trust someone who claims that he can do what no one else can. You know, people would listen to that in government. Oh my God. Memes were expensive, not just spoken. Yeah, they definitely were. Making pictures back then was not cheap. The Boy and the Filberts. A boy once thrust his hand into a pitcher that was filled of figs and filberts. He grasped as many as his fists could possibly hold, but when he tried to draw it out, the narrowness of the neck prevented him. Not liking to lose any of them, but unable to draw out his hand full, he burst into tears and bitterly bemoaned his hand fortune. An honest fellow who stood by gave him this wise and reasonable advice: "Grasp only half the quantity, my boy, and you will easily succeed." The moral of the story is do not seize more than you can carry away. The Knight and the Charger. A certain soldier, in time of war, took great pains to keep his horse well fed and cared for, and in first-rate condition. When the war was over, the soldier's pay was reduced, and he allowed his horse, that had carried him nobly through many a hot engagement, to be used for dragging huge logs of timber, and for hire in many other rough and disagreeable ways. Being thus hardly fed and badly treated, the animal's strength and spirits fell away. It was not long before the war was renewed, and the soldier, taking his horse again, tried by good feeding and better treatment to make him into a battle steed once more. There was not time for this, however, and the horse, as his weak legs gave way under him in a charge, said to his master, "It is too late now to repair your neglect. You have degraded me from a horse into an ass. It is not my fault that I cannot at once turn back from an ass into a horse." The moral of the story: it's easier to go from good to bad than from bad to good. Fuck that, I'll take two. Conversion game. The Crow and the Raven. A crow was very jealous of the raven because he was considered a bird of good omen and had always attracted the attention of men, indicating by his flight the good or evil course of future events. Seeing some travelers approaching, she flew up into a tree and, perching herself on one of the branches, cawed as loudly as she could. The travelers turned towards the sound, and wondering what it boded, when one of them said to his companions, "Let us proceed on our journey, my friend, for it is only the caw of a crow, and her cry, you know, is no omen." The moral of the story is those who assume a character that does not belong to them only makes themselves ridiculous. The Man in the Tree. One day a man went into a forest and asked the trees if they would be so good as to give him a handle for his axe. The trees readily granted his request and gave him a piece of tough ash. But no sooner had the man fitted it into his axe head than he quickly began to use it, and laid about him so vigorously that the giants of the forest fell under his strokes. "Alas," said a doomed oak to a cedar, "the first step lost us all. If we had not given up our rights to the ash, we might have stood for ages." The moral of the story is let not your conduct furnish a handle against yourself. Really feel like the government needs to read a lot of these stories. The sick stag. A stag whose joints had become stiff with old age was at great pains to get together a large heap of fodder, enough, as he thought, to last him for the remainder of his days. He stretched himself out upon it, and now, dozing, now nibbling, made up his mind to wait quietly for the end. He had always been of a gay and lively turn, and had made in his time many friends. These now came in great numbers to see him and wish him farewell. While engaging in friendly talk over past achievements in old times, what more natural than that they should help themselves to a little of the food which seemed so plentiful and stored around? The end of the matter was that the poor stag died not so much of sickness or of old age as for sheer want of food which his friends had eaten for him. Moral of the story is thoughtless friends bring more hurt than profit. Actually, I'm pretty sure Aesop does have it in here somewhere. I think we might have read that one before. The Swallow and the Crow. A swallow was once boasting to a crow about her birth. I was once a princess, said she, the daughter of a king of Athens, but my husband used me cruelly and cut out my tongue for a slight fault. Then, to protect me from further injury, I was turned by Juno into a bird. You chatter enough as it is, said the crow. What you would have been like if you hadn't lost your tongue, I can't think. The moral of the story is the vain are always ready to shower themselves with praise. The Immigrant Mice. A mouse, wary of living in the continual alarm attention... A mouse wary of hold on, I need to take a drink, apparently. Let's try this again. A mouse, weary of living in the continual alarm attendant on the carnage committed among her nation by cats and traps, thus addressed herself to the tenant of a hole near her own. An excellent thought has just come into my head. I read in some book, which I gnawed a few days ago, that there is a fine country called the Indies, in which mice are in much greater security than here. In that region, the sages believe that the soul of a mouse has been that of a king, a great captain, or some wonderful saint, and that after death it will probably enter the body of a beautiful woman or a mighty potentate. If I recollect rightly, this is called metempsychosis. Under this idea, they treat all animals with paternal charity and build and page isn't turning. And build and endow hospitals for mice, where they are fed like people of consequence. Come then, my good sister, let us hasten... Oh, you bastard. Okay. Let us hasten to a country the customs of which are so excellent, and where justice is done to our merits. But sister, replied her neighbor, do not cats enter these hospitals? If they do, metempsychosis must take place very soon, and in great numbers, and a talon or tooth might make a faker or a king a miracle we can do very well without. Do not fear, said the first mouse. In these countries, order is completely established. The cats have their houses as well as we ours, and they have their hospitals for the sick separate from ours. After this conversation, the two mice set out together, contriving the evening before they set sail to creep along the cordage of a vessel that was to make a long voyage. They got under way and were enraptured by the sight of the sea that took them from the abominable shores on which cant exercise their tyranny. The voyage was pleasant, and they reached Surat, not like merchants to acquire riches, but to receive good treatment from the Hindus. They had scarcely entered one of the houses fitted up for mice when they aspired to the best accommodation. One of them pretended to recollect having formerly been a Brahmin on the coast of Malabar, and the other protested that she had been a fine lady of the same country, with long ears, but they displayed so much impertinence that the Indian mice lost all patience. A civil war commenced, and no quarter was given to the two newcomers who pretended to impose on the laws of the others, when instead of being eaten up by cats, they were strangled by their own brethren. It is useless to go far in search of safety if we are not modest and wise. I don't know if it was the East Coast. I don't know if it was the East, but it was somewhere. The shepherd and the sheep. A shepherd driving his sheep to a wood saw an oak of unusual size, full of acorns, and spreading his cloak under the branches, he climbed up into the tree and shook down the acorns. The sheep, eating them carelessly, tore the cloak. The shepherd, coming down and seeing what was done, said, "Oh, you ungrateful creature! You provide wool to make garments for all other men, but you destroy the clothes of him who feeds you." The moral of the story is carelessness is a form of ingratitude. That's just don't be a jackass. Yes, many of these are literally just don't be an asshole. But when you consider the number of stories that are just don't be an asshole and people are still assholes, how old are these? Let me see if they tell us back in the beginning. There should be some blurb on what Aesop's fables are. Nope, that's the illustrations. And that's just the fables. There is no blurb on what they are. There's just a whole lot of fables in here. But yeah, they are fucking old. 3,000 years? Sounds right. Well, there's more. Yeah, Aesop was the one who compiled them. So yeah, they vary. Some of them are thousands upon thousands, and some of them are maybe only 1,000 or 2. The Bear in the Beehive. A bear that had found his way into a garden where bees were kept began to turn over the beehives and devour the honey. He paid no attention to the first bees which came to attack him, or to the threats from others. But finally, the bees settled in swarms about his head and stung his eyes and nose so much that, maddened with pain, he tore the skin from his head with his own claws. The moral of the story is despise not little things. Well, and these stories are why I get so passionate about the role of fairy tales and everything in life, because kids' entertainment today lacks these sorts of lessons. They're not teaching kids anything, really. Well, I mean, they're teaching kids some things, but nothing good. It's kind of the reverse of the mouse who freed up the lion, yeah. The Falconer and the Partridge. A partridge, being taken in the net of a falconer, begged hard of the man to be set free, and promised if he were let go to decoy other partridges into the net. "No," replied the falconer, "I did not mean to spare you, But if I had, your woods would have now condemned you. The scoundrel who, to save himself, offers to betray his friends, deserves worse than death. The moral of the story is better a death with honor than a life with shame. The Hart and the Vine. A hart, being pursued by the hunters, hid himself under the broad leaves of a shady spreading vine. When the hunters had gone by and given him over for lost, he thought himself quite secure, and began to crop and eat the leaves of the vine. The rustling of the branches drew the eyes of the hunters that way, and they shot their arrows there at a venture, and killed the hart. I am rightly served, gasped he in dying, for I ought not to have mistreated the friend who would have saved me. The moral of the story is be not forgetful of benefits. Genius, virtue, and reputation. Genius, virtue, and reputation, three great friends, agreed to travel over the island of Great Britain to see whatever might be worthy of observation. But as some misfortune, said they, happened to separate us, let us consider, before we set out, by what means we may find each other again. Should it be my ill fate, said Genius, to be severed from my friends, heaven forbid, you may find me kneeling in devotion before the tomb of Shakespeare, or wrapped in some grove where Milton talked with angels, or musing in the grotto where Pope caught inspiration. Virtue, with a sigh, acknowledged that her friends were not very numerous. But were I to lose you, she cried, with whom I am at present so happily united, I should choose to take sanctuary in the temples of religion, in the palaces of royalty, or in the stately domes of ministers of state. But as it may be my ill fortune to be there denied admittance, inquire for some cottage where contentment has a bower, and there you will certainly find me. Ah, my dear friend, said your reputation very earnestly, you, I perceive, when missing, may possibly be recovered. But take care, I entreat you. Always keep sight of me, for if I am lost, I am never to be retrieved. There are few things that can be so irreparably lost as reputation. The Cock and the Horses. A cock once got into a stable and went about nesting and scratching in the straw among the horses, who every now and then would stamp and fling out their heels. So the cock gravely set to work to admonish them. Pray, my good friends, let us have a care, said he, that we don't tread one another. The moral of the story is disinterested counsel is rare. I am indeed here, Caesar. I am in here. I am on Rumble. I am on Kick. I am omnipresent. I'm really everywhere, but what's that one called? Odyssey. Excuse me. Excuse me. Again, God damn it. The Gardener and His Master. In the midst of a beautiful flower garden, there was a large pond filled with carp, tench, perch, and other freshwater fish. It was also intended to water the garden. The foolish gardener, being particularly careful of the flowers, so emptied the pond of its water that there scarcely remained sufficient to keep the fish alive. His master, coming down to walk in the garden and seeing this mismanagement, scolded the gardener, saying, "Though I am very fond of the flowers, I also like to regale myself with fish." Gardener, being a coarse, ignorant peasant, obeyed his master so precisely that he gave no water to the flowers, in order that the fish might have enough. Some time after, the master again visited his garden, and to his great mortification, saw his beautiful flowers all dead and drooping. "You blockhead," he cried. "In the future, remember not to use so much water for the flowers as to leave me without fish, nor yet be so liberal to the fish as to kill my beauteous blossoms." Moral of the story is moderation in everything is best. Truly, you cannot escape her tendrils. No, you cannot. I am everywhere. Mercury and the Carver. Mercury, having a mind to know how much he was esteemed among men, disguised himself, and going into a carver's shop, where little images were sold, saw those of Jupiter, Juno himself, and most of the other gods and goddesses. Pretending that he wanted to buy, he said to the carver, pointing to the figure of Jupiter, "What do you ask for that?" 10 pieces of silver," answered the man. "And what for that?" meaning Juno. "Ah," said the man, "I will let you have her for 5 pieces." "Well, and of what price is this?" said Mercury, laying his hand on a figure of himself, with rings, rod, and all, complete. "You ought to want more for him, as he is a special patron of your craft." "Why," replied the man, "if you really mean business and will buy the other 2, I'll throw you that fellow into the bargain." The moral of the story is a spy never learns good of himself. Mercury is, I'd have to look it up. It's been a while. But Mercury is a few things. Isn't he like the god of war and art? The god of translators and interpreters. What? Mercury, mythology. Major god in Roman religion, mythology, blah, blah, blah. God of financial gain, commerce, eloquence, messages, communication, including divination, travelers, boundaries, luck, trickery, and thieves. All right. The Lion and the Hare. A lion came across the hare, who lay fast asleep. He was just in the act of seizing her when a fine young hart trotted by, and he left the hare to follow him. The hare, scared by the noise, awoke and scudded away. The lion was not able, after a long chase, to catch the hart, and returned to feed upon the hare. On finding that the hare had also run off, he said, "I am rightly served for having let go the food I had in my hand for the chance of obtaining more." The moral of the story is be content with an assured income. Mercury makes my phone work. Also blesses the muggers that steal. Absolutely. That is correct. The master and his scholar. A schoolmaster was walking upon the bank of a river. Not far from his school, he heard a cry as of someone in distress. Running to the side of the river, he saw one of his scholars in the water, hanging by the boughs of a willow. The boy, it seemed, had been learning to swim with corks, and fancying that he could now do without them, had thrown them aside. The force of the stream hurried him out of his depths, and he would certainly have been drowned had not the friendly branch of a willow hung in his way. The master took up the corks, which were lying upon the bank, and threw them to his scholar. "Let this be a warning to you," he said, "and in your future life never throw away your corks until you are quite sure you have the strength and experience enough to swim without them." The moral of the story is too great assurance is folly. Scholar, Scholar. 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 The Sorceress. Night and silence had now given repose to the whole world when an old, ill-natured sorceress, in order to exercise her infernal arts, entered a gloomy wood that trembled at her approach. The scene of her horrid incantation was within the circumference of a large circle, in the center of which was raised an altar, where the hallowed vervain blazed in triangular flames. The mischievous hag pronounced the dreadful words, which bound all hell in obedience to her charms. She blew a raging pestilence from her lips into the neighboring fields. The innocent candle died to afford a fit sacrifice to the infernal deities. The moon, by powerful spells drawn down from her orbs, entered the wood. Legion of spirits from Pluto's realms appeared before the altar and demanded her pleasure. "Tell me," said she, "where shall I find what I have lost, my favorite little dog?" "How?" cried they all, enraged. Impertinent beldame. "Must the order of nature be inverted and the repose of every creature disturbed for the sake of thy little dog?" The moral of the story is there are many people who would unhinge the world to ease themselves of the smallest inconvenience. The Lion and the Boar. On a summer day when the great heat induced a general thirst, a lion and a boar came at the same moment to a small well to drink. They fiercely disputed which of them should drink first, and were soon engaged in the agonies of a mortal combat. On their stopping to take breath for the fiercer renewal of the strife, they saw some vultures waiting in the distance to feast on the one which should fall first. They at once made up their quarrel, saying, "It is better for us to make friends than to become food of vultures." The moral of the story is the man at strife is always in peril. The Porcupine and the Snakes. A porcupine, seeking shelter, desired some snakes to give him admittance into their cave. They accordingly let him in, but were afterwards so annoyed by his sharp, prickly quills that they repented of their hospitality and asked him to withdraw and leave them their hole to themselves. "No," said he, "you may quit the place if you don't like it. For my part, I am very satisfied where I am." The moral of the story is be cautious in your choice of friends. Jupiter and the Monkey. Jupiter issued a proclamation to all of the beasts of the forests and promised a royal reward to the one whose offspring should be deemed the handsomest. The monkey, as promised, turn the page. The monkey came with the rest and presented with all a mother's tenderness a flat-nosed, hairless, ill-featured monkey as a candidate for the promised reward. A general laugh greeted her on the presentation of her son. She resolutely said, "I know not whether Jupiter will allot the prize to my son, but this I do know is that he is at least in the eyes of me, his mother, the dearest, handsomest, and most beautiful of all." The moral of the story is learn to value your own. Not too much. The moral of the story is castle doctrine. And the moral of the story is don't let somebody in with more firepower than you. The Bees and Their Keeper. A thief came into a bee garden one day while the keeper was away and robbed the hives. Not long afterward, the keeper returned and was greatly disturbed about the theft, not only because of the loss of honey, but also because the hives had been overturned. While he was busily at work trying to set the garden at rights, the bees came home laden from the fields, and missing their combs, flew in angry swarms about their master. "Foolish and ungrateful creatures," he cried. "You let a stranger who has robbed you escape unharmed, while you are ready to attack your best friend." The moral of the story is people too often mistake their friends for their foes. I have no idea what that means, sleazy. The father and his two daughters. A man had two daughters, one of whom married a farmer and the other a potter. After a while, he paid a visit to the farmer and asked his daughter how she was and if all was going well with her. Splendidly, she replied. I could wish for nothing more if only we had a little more rain for the crops. And the same day he went to the potter's and asked his other daughter how things were faring in her new home. Never better, she replied, if only we had a little more fair weather to bake our clay. Alack, said the father, if you want shine and your sister rain, which am I to pray for on my own account? The moral of the story is, if all prayers were answered, no one would be satisfied. The Wolf Teaching the Fox. Said the fox to the wolf one day, My friend, you have no idea how badly I often fare. A horribly tough and old cock or a lean, shriveled hen is a kind of food of which it is quite possible in time to get tired of. Now it seems to me that you live a good deal better than I do, and don't run into so much danger either. I have to go prowling about the houses. You get your prey in the fields. Teach me your business. Let me be the first of my race to have a fat sheep whenever I wish. Teach me, there's a good fellow, and you shall find yourself no loser in the end. I will, said the wolf, and by the by, I have just lost a brother. You will find his body over yonder. Slip into the skin and come to me again. The fox did as he was told, and the wolf gave him many a lesson in growling, biting, fighting, and deportment, which the fox executed first badly, then fairly, and then in the end quite as well as his master. Just then a flock of sheep came in sight, and into the midst of them rushed the new-made wolf with such fury and noise that the shepherd boy, dog, and sheep fled in terror to gain their home, leaving only one poor sheep behind that had been seized by the throat. Just at that instant, a cock in the nearest farm crowed loud and shrill. There was no resisting the familiar sound. Out of the wolf's skin slipped the fox and made toward the cock as fast as he could, forgetting in a moment his lessons, the sheep, the wolf, and everything else about which he had just been making all the fuss in the world. The moral of the story is training cannot overcome nature. Yeah, basic skills are absolutely an important thing in the world. The Rich Man and the Tanner. A rich man took up residence next door to a tanner and found the smell of the tan yard so extremely unpleasant that he told him he must go. The tanner delayed his departure, and the rich man had to speak to him several times about it, and every time the tanner said he was making arrangements to move very shortly. This went on for some time, till at last the rich man got so used to the smell that he ceased to mind it and troubled the tanner with his objections no more. The moral of the story is minor annoyances lessen with time. Foxes love cock, it's just how it is. The Fox and the Crow. You should know this one, Kaser. It's a classic. A crow, having stolen a piece of cheese from a cottage window, flew with it to a tree that was some way off. A fox, drawn by the smell of the cheese, came and sat at the foot of the tree, and tried to find some way of making it his. "Good morning, dear Miss Crow," he said. "How well you are looking today. What handsome feathers yours are, to be sure. Perhaps, too, your voice is as sweet as your feathers are fine? If so, you really are the queen of birds." The crow, quite beside herself to hear such praise, at once opened a beak wide to let the fox judge of her voice, and so let fall the cheese. The fox snapped it up and exclaimed, "Aha, my good soul! Learn all who are fatter have their own ends in view. That lesson will repay you for a bit of cheese." The moral of the story is, beware the flatterer. Hey, Zero. The wolf in sheep's clothing. A wolf, wrapping himself in the skin of a sheep, by that means got admission into a sheepfold, where he devoured several of the young lambs. The shepherd, however, soon found him out and hung him up to a tree, still in his disguise. Some other shepherds, passing that way, thought it was a sheep hanging, and cried to their friend, "What, brother, is that the way you serve sheep in this part of the country?" "No, friends," he cried, turning the hanging body around so they might see what it was. "But it is the best way to serve wolves, even though they be dressed in sheep's clothing." The moral of the story is the credit got by a lie lasts only till the truth comes out. It really is. Even though, I'll be honest, the lesson is not the same as what the actual story is. Or it's not the same lesson that you learn today when people talk about it. The man who lost his spade. A man was engaging in digging over his vineyard, and one day on coming to work he missed his spade. Thinking it may have been stolen by one of his laborers, he questioned them closely, but they one and all denied any knowledge of it. He was not convinced by their denials, and insisted they should all go to the town and take oath in a temple that they were not guilty of the theft. This was because he had no great opinion of the simple country deities, but thought that the thief would not pass undetected by the shrewder gods in town. When they got inside the gates, the first thing they heard was the town crier proclaiming a reward for information about a thief who had stolen something from the city temple. "Well," said the man to himself, "it strikes me I had better go back home again. If these town gods can't detect the thieves who steal from their own temples, it's scarcely likely they can tell me who stole my spade." The moral of the story is an ineffectual god is no god at all. The vain jackdaw. A discontented jackdaw once found some feathers which had fallen from the peacocks, and dressed himself with his picked up plumage. He then sought out the company of these birds, and strutted about with them, much pleased with his looks. But they soon found him out, pulled their feathers off him, and treated him so roughly that he was glad to flee from them. He went back to the society of his fellow jackdaws, but they in turn would have nothing to do with so sorry looking a bird. The moral of the story is the honest man shuns pretension. The woman and the farmer. A woman who had lately lost her husband used to go every day to his grave and lament her loss. A farmer, who was engaged in plowing not far from the spot, set eyes upon the woman and desired to have her for his wife. So he left his plow and came and sat by her side, and began to shed tears himself. She asked him why he wept, and he replied, "I have lately lost my wife, who was very dear to me, and the tears ease my grief. And I," said she, "have lost my husband." And so for a while they mourned in silence. Then he said, "Since you and I are in like case, shall we not do well to marry and live together? I shall take the place of your dead husband, and you that of my dead wife." The woman consented to the plan, which indeed seemed reasonable enough, and they dried their tears. Meanwhile, a thief had come and stolen the oxen which the farmer had left with his plow. On discovering the theft, he beat his breast and loudly bewailed his loss. When the woman heard his cries, she came and said, "Why are you weeping still?" To which he replied, "Yes, and I mean it this time." The moral of the story is false tears are indistinguishable from real tears, save to he who cries them. Hey, Shadow, how's it going? The Ass and the Lion Hunting. The lion once took a fancy to go hunting in company with an ass. He sent the ass into the forest and told him to bray there as hard as he could. By that means, he said, you will rouse all the beasts in the forest. I shall stand here and catch all that fly this way. So the ass brayed in his most hideous manner, and when the lion was tired of slaughter, he called to him to come out of the wood. Did I not do my part well? Asked the conceited beast. Excellently, replied the lion. Had I not known that you were nothing more than an ass, I should have been frightened myself. The moral of the story is the braggart is not the fighter. Well, surviving is better than the other options, I suppose, Shadow, but... The Gnat and the Bull. A sturdy bull was driven by the heat of the weather to wade up to his knees in a cold and swift running stream. He had not long been there when a gnat, who had been disporting himself in the air, pitched upon one of his horns. My dear fellow, said the gnat, with as great a buzz as he could manage, pray excuse the liberty I take. If I am too heavy, only say so, and I will go at once and rest upon the poplar which grows hard by the edge of the stream. Stay or go, it makes no difference to me, replied the bull. But had it not been for your buzz, I should not even know you were there. The moral of this story is some men are more important in their own eyes than in those of their neighbors. The Mice in Council. A certain cat lived in a large country house. Was so vigilant and active that the mice, finding their numbers grievously thin, held a council with closed doors to consider what they had best do. Many plans had been considered and dismissed when a young mouse, rising and catching the eyes of the president, said that he had a proposal to make that he was sure must meet with approval of all. If, he said, the cat wore around her neck a little bell, every step she took would make it tinkle. Then ever forewarned of her approach, we should have time to reach our holes. By this simple means, we should live in safety and defy her power. The speaker resumed his seat with a complacent air, and a murmur of applause rose from the audience. An old gray mouse, with a merry twinkle in his eye, now got up and said the plan of the last speaker was an admirable one, but he feared it had one drawback. My friend has not told us, said he, who is to put the bell on the cat. The moral of the story is counsel, to be wise, must be practical. The Fox and the Wolf. A wolf who lived in a cave, having laid in a good store of food, kept himself very close and set to work to enjoy it. A fox, who missed the wolf from his usual haunts, at last found out where he was and, under pretense of asking after his health, came to the mouth of the cave and peeked in. He expected to be asked inside to dinner, but the wolf gruffly said he was far too ill to see anybody, so the fox trotted off again in anything but a charitable state of mind. Away he went to a shepherd, and told the man to get a good stick and come with him, and he would show him where to find a wolf. The shepherd came accordingly and killed the wolf. The fox took possession of the cave and his store, but he did not enjoy the fruits of his treachery, for the man, passing by that way a few days after, looked into the cave, and seeing the fox there, killed him too. The moral of the story is he who brings mischief invites mischief. The Gourd and the Pine. A gourd was planted close beside a large, well-spread pine. The season was kindly, and the gourd shot itself up in a short time, climbing up the boughs and twining around them till it toppled over and covered the tree itself. The leaves were large and the flowers and fruit fair, insomuch that the gourd, comparing itself with the pine, had the assurance to value itself above it. Why, said the gourd, you have been more years growing to this stature than I have been days. Well, replied the pine, but after many winters and summers that I have endured, the many blasting colds and parching heats, you see me the very same thing I was so long ago. But you once come to the proof, the first blight or frost shall bring down that pride of you and strip you of all your glory. The moral of the story is time tests merits. Gourd and pine, yes. Here's an oldie but a goodie. The tortoise and the hare. The hare one day laughed at the tortoise for his short feet, slowness, and awkwardness. Though you may be swift as the wind, replied the tortoise good-naturedly, I can beat you in a race. The hare looked on the challenger as a great joke, but consented to a trial of speed, and the fox was selected to act as umpire and hold the stakes. The rivals started, and the hare, of course, soon left the tortoise far behind. Having reached midway to the goal, he began to play about, nibble young herbage, and amuse herself in many ways. The day being warm, she even thought she would take a little nap in a shady spot, for she thought that if the tortoise should pass her while she slept, she could easily overtake him again before he reached the end. The tortoise meanwhile plodded on, unwavering and unresting, straight towards the goal. The hare, having overslept herself, started up from her nap and was surprised to find that the tortoise was nowhere in sight. Off she went at full speed, but on reaching the winning post, found that the tortoise was already there, waiting for her arrival. The moral of the story is, slow and steady wins the race. The Lion, the Fox, and the Wolf. The king of the forest was once long and seriously ill, and his majesty's temper not being at all improved by the trial, the fox, with his usual discretion, kept away from the court as much as he could. He slunk about, however, as near as he was able without being seen, and one day overheard the wolf talking to the lion about him. The wolf and the fox were never good friends, and the wolf was now calling the lion's attention to the fact that the fox had not shown his face for a long time at court. I have strong reasons for suspecting that he is busily engaged in hatching some treason or other, said the wolf. The lion thereupon commanded that the fox should be brought at once to his presence. So the jackal led him in. What do you mean by not paying us court? Roared the monarch. Pardon, your majesty, replied the fox, bowing low. I did not absent myself from want of respect to you, but out of concern for your welfare. I have gone far and wide, he continued, and consulted the finest doctors to the best means of curing your malady. Have you found a cure? Eagerly inquired the lion. They tell me, answered the fox with a leer at the wolf. The only way to save your majesty's life is to wrap yourself in the warm skin of a newly slain wolf. The lion, eager to try the remedy at once, dragged the wolf to him and killed him on the spot. The moral of the story is evil is payable. Evil. I've probably heard it, Derp. I love Moody Blues. It's been a long time since I've listened, I'm sure. The boy bathing. A boy was bathing in a river and got out of his depth and was in great danger of being drowned. A man who was passing along a road heard his cries for help and went to the riverside and began to scold him for being so careless as to get into deep water, but made no attempt to help him. Oh, sir, cried the boy, please help me first and scold me afterwards. The moral of the story is give assistance, not advice, in a crisis. The gardener and his dog. A gardener's dog, frisking about the brink of a well in the garden, happened to fall in. The gardener very readily ran to his assistance, but as he was trying to help him out, the dog bit him on the hand. The man, annoyed at what he considered such an ungrateful behavior towards one whose only aim was to save his life, came away and left the dog to drown. The moral of the story is kindness should merit kindness. The runaway slave. A slave, being discontented with his lot, ran away from his master. He was soon missed by the latter, who lost no time in mounting his horse and setting out in pursuit of the fugitive. He presently came up with him and the slave in hope of avoiding. He presently came up with him and the slave in hope of avoiding capture, slipped into a treadmill and hid himself there. "Aha," said his master. "That's the very place for you, my man." The moral of the story is you can't escape your fate. The thief and the dog. A thief who came near a house one night to rob it was prevented by a dog who began to bark loudly. The thief tried to coax him into silence by offering him a tempting piece of meat. "No," said the dog, "I will not sell my master and myself for a bite of meat. For after you have finished with him, who will take care of me?" The moral of the story is honesty is the best policy. All right, Trilobait. Have a good night. The Crab and the Fox. A crab, forsaking the seashore, chose a neighboring green meadow as its feeding ground. A fox came across him and, being very much famished, ate him up. Just as he was on the point of being eaten, the crab said, "I will deserve my fate, for what business had I on the land, when by my nature and habits I am only adapted for the sea?" The moral of the story is contentment with our lot of life is an element of happiness. The tongues. Xanthus invited a large company to dinner, and Aesop was ordered to furnish the feast with the choicest dainties that money could procure. The first course consisted of tongues cooked in different ways and served with appropriate sauces. This gave rise to a deal of mirth and witty remarks among the assembled guests. The second course, however, like the first, was nothing but tongues, and so the third and the fourth. The matter seemed to all have gone beyond a jest, and Xanthus angrily demanded of Aesop, "Did I not tell you, sirrah, to provide the choicest dainties that money could procure?" "And what excels the tongue?" replied Aesop. "It is the greatest channel of learning and philosophy. By this noble organ, addresses and eulogies are made, in commerce, contracts, and marriages completely established. Nothing is equal to the tongue." The company applauded Aesop's wit, and good humor was restored. "Well," said Xanthus to the guests, "pray do me the favor of dining with me again tomorrow. And if this is your best," continued he, turning to Aesop, "pray tomorrow let's have some of the worst meat you can find." The next day, when dinner time came and the guests were assembled, great was their astonishment and great the anger of Xanthus at finding that again nothing but tongues was put upon the table. "How, sir," said Xanthus, "should tongues be the best of meat one day and the worst another?" "What," replied Aesop, "can be worse than the tongue? What wickedness is there under the sun that it has not been a part in? Treasons, violence, injustice, and fraud are debated, resolved upon, and communicated by the tongue. It is the ruin of empires and cities and of private friendships." The company were more struck than ever by Aesop's ingenuity, and successfully interceded for him with his master. The moral of the story is, a wise answer saves all. Crabs are delicious. An old man had several sons. Oh, this is the old man and his sons. I suppose I should actually tell you the title before I start reading, huh? An old man had several sons who were always falling out with one another. He had often, but to no purpose, exhorted them to live together in harmony. One day he called them round, and procuring a bundle of sticks, bade them each to try in turn to break it across. Each put forth all his strength, but the bundle resisted their efforts. Then, cutting the cord which bound the sticks together, he told his sons to break them separately. This was done with the greatest ease. "See, my sons," exclaimed he, "the power of unity. Bound together by brotherly love, you may defy almost every mortal ill. Divided, you will fall prey to your enemies." The moral of the story is a house divided against itself cannot stand. The Ant. Ants were once men and made their living by tilling the soil, but not content with the result of their own work, they were always casting longing eyes upon the crops and fruits of their neighbors, which they stole whenever they got the chance and added to their own store. At last their covetousness made Jupiter so angry that he changed them into ants. But though their forms were changed, their nature remained the same, and so, to this day, they go about among the cornfields and gather the fruits of others' labor and store them up for their own use. The moral of the story is you may punish a thief, but his bent remains. Surprised the government hasn't burned this book. I mean, I'm certain governments have burned it. The Sheep, the Wolf, and the Stag. A stag once asked a sheep to lend him a measure of wheat, saying that his friend the wolf would be his surety. The sheep, however, was afraid that they meant to cheat her, so she excused herself, saying, "The wolf is in a habit of seizing what he wants and running off with it without paying, and you too can run much faster than I. So how shall I be able to come up with either of you when the debt falls due?" The moral of the story is two blacks do not make a white. I'm not sure if that's racial or not. Just saying. I don't think it is. But it's funny. The Man and His Idol. A poor man who longed to be rich used to pray day and night for wealth to an idol which he had in his house. Notwithstanding all his prayer, instead of becoming richer, he got poorer. Out of patience with his idol, he one day took it by the legs and dashed it to pieces upon the floor, whereupon hundreds of gold pieces which had been hidden in the body flew about the room. Overjoyed at the sight, he exclaimed, "How have I wasted my time in worshipping a god who yields to force what he would not grant in prayer?" The moral of the story is only ask favors only of those who can grant them. Shh, robust, shh. Let's not get into that. Here's another oldie but goodie. The Ant and the Grasshopper. A grasshopper who had merrily sung all the summer was almost perishing with hunger in the winter. So she went to some ants that lived near and asked them to lend her a little of the food they had put by. "You shall certainly be paid before this time of the year comes again," said she. "What did you do all summer?" asked they. "Why, all day long, and all night long too, I sang, if you please," answered the grasshopper. "Oh, you sang, did you?" said the ants. "Now then, you can dance." The moral of the story is provide today for the future. The Fox and the Cock. A fox, passing early one summer's morning near a farmyard, was caught in a trap by the farmer, which the farmer had planted there for that purpose. A cock saw at a distance what had happened, and was hardly daring to trust himself too near so dangerous a foe, approached him cautiously and peeped at him, not without considerable fear. The fox saw him and in his most bewitching manner addressed him as follows. Sire, dear cousin, said he, what an unfortunate accident has befallen me here, and believe me, it is all on your account. I was creeping through yonder hedge on my way homeward when I heard you crow and resolved, before I went any further, to come up and ask after your health. On the way I met with this disaster. Now if you would but run up to the house and bring me a pointed stick, I think I could force it into this trap and free myself from its grip. Such a service, believe me, I should not soon forget. The cock ran off and soon come back, but not without the stick. But it was carried in the hand of the sturdy farmer to whom he had told the story, and who had lost no time in putting it out of Master Fox's power to do any harm in the future. The moral of the story is use discrimination in your charities. The Wolves and the Sick Ass. An ass being sick, the report of it was spread abroad in the country, and some did not hesitate to say she would die before the night was over. Upon this, several wolves came to the stable where she lay, and rapping at the door, inquired how she did. A young ass thrust her head out the window and told them that her mother was much better than they desired. The moral of the story is words reveal wishes. The Nightingale and his Cage. A nightingale, which belonged to a person of quality, was fed every day with plenty of choice dainties, and kept in a stately cage. Yet, notwithstanding this happy condition, he was uneasy, and envied the condition of those birds who lived free in the woods, and hopped up and down unconfined from bough to bough. He earnestly longed to lead the same life, and secretly pined because his wishes were denied him. After some time, however, it happened that the door of his cage was left unfastened, and the long-wished-for opportunity was given him of making his escape. Accordingly, he flew out and hid himself among the shades of the neighboring wood, where he thought to spend the remainder of his days in contentment. But alas, the poor bird was mistaken. 1,000 evils which he never dreamed of attended this elopement of his, and he was now really that miserable creature which before he had only been in imagination. The delicate food he used to eat was no more. He did not know how to provide for himself, and was even ready to die with hunger. A storm of rain, thunder, and lightning filled the air, and he had no place of safety. His feathers were wetted with the heavy shower, and he was almost blinded with flashes of lightning. His tender nature could not withstand the severe shock. He even died under it. But just before he breathed his last, he is said to have made this reflection. Ah, were I but in my cage again, I would never wander more. The moral of the story is liberty is most attractive to those who do not know its price. And liberty does have a heavy price, my friends. It's part of what makes it so valuable. The Ape and the Bee. An ape who was having a great desire to partake of the honey which was deposited in a rich beehive, but was intimidated from meddling with it by having felt the smart of the sting, made the following reflection. How strange that a bee, while producing a delicacy so passing sweet and tempting, should also carry with him a sting so dreadfully bitter. Yes, answered the bee, but equal to the sweetness of my better work is the bitterness of my sting when my anger is provoked. The moral of the story is beware how you arouse the little man. It's an interesting statement. Absolutely robust. The Geese and the Cranes. A flock of geese and a covey of cranes used to feed together in a wheat field where the grain was just ripening for harvest. One day the owner of the field came up and surprised them. The cranes were thin and light and easily flew away, but the geese were heavy and flat, and many of them were caught. The moral of the story is many criminals go unpunished. The Passenger and the Pilot. It had blown a violent storm at sea, and the whole crew of a vessel were in imminent danger of shipwreck. After the rolling of the waves was somewhat abated, a certain passenger who had never been to sea before, observing the pilot to have appeared wholly unconcerned even in their greatest danger, had the curiosity to ask him what death his father had died. "What death?" said the pilot. "Why, he perished at sea, as my grandfather did before him. And you are not afraid of trusting yourself to an element that has proved thus fatal to your family?" "Afraid? By no means. Why, we must all die. Is not your father dead?" "Yes, but he died in his bed." "And why, then, are you not afraid of trusting yourself in your bed?" "Because I am there perfectly secure." "It may be so," replied the pilot. "But if the hand of Providence is equally extended over all places, there is no more reason for me to be afraid of going to sea than for you to be afraid of going to bed." The moral of the story is faith is not a relative matter. The Fox and the Lion. For the first time, the fox saw the lion, and he nearly died of fright. The next time, he gathered sufficient courage to have a good stare. The third time, he went boldly up to the lion and commenced a familiar conversation with him. The moral of the story is familiarity breeds contempt. Socrates and his friends. Socrates once built a house, and everybody who saw it had something other to say against it. "What a front!" said one. "What an inside!" said another. "What rooms! Not big enough to turn around in," said a third. Small as it is," answered Socrates. "I wish I had true friends enough to fill it." The moral of the story is houses are easier to get than friends. A boar challenges an ass. Some hard words passed between a boar and an ass, and a challenge followed upon them. The boar, priding himself upon his tusks and comparing his head with the ass's head, looked forward to the fight with confidence. The time for the battle came, and the combatants approached one another. The boar rushed upon the ass, who, suddenly turning round, let his hoofs fly with all his might right in the jaws of the boar, so that the latter staggered and fell back. "Well," said he, "who could have expected an attack from that end?" The moral of the story is attacks come from unexpected quarters. I wouldn't say houses are that hard to get now, but it really depends on where you are. The Sparrow and the Hare. A hare, being seized by an eagle, cried out in a piteous manner. The sparrow, sitting on a tree close by, so far from pitying the poor animal, made merry at his expense. "Why did you stay there to be taken?" said he. "Could not so swift a creature as you have easily escaped from an eagle?" Just then, a hawk swooped down and carried off the sparrow, who, when he felt the hawk's talons in his sides, cried still more loudly than the hare. The hare, in the agonies of death, received comfort from the fact that the fate of the mocking sparrow was no better than his own. I think they understand what a boar is, Kesar. Moral of the story is when calamity overtakes the hard-hearted, they receive no sympathy. People know what boars are. They play RPGs. Or they just live in Texas where they're overran. Tons of fucking boars down there. The Mouse and the Bull. A bull gave chase to a mouse which had bitten him on the nose, but the mouse was too quick for him and slipped into a hole in the wall. The bull charged furiously into the wall again and again until he was tired out and sunk down on the ground exhausted with his efforts. When all was quiet, the mouse darted out and bit him again. Beside himself with rage, he started to his feet, but by that time the mouse was back in his hole again, and he could do nothing but bellow and fume in helpless anger. Presently he heard a shrill little voice say from inside the wall, "You big fellows don't always have it your way, you see. Sometimes we little ones come off best." The moral of the story is the battle is not always to the strong. This is one fucking asshole of a mouse. The Farmer and His Sons. A certain farmer, lying at the point of death, called his sons around him and gave into their charge his fields and vineyards, telling them that a treasure lay hidden somewhere in them, within a foot of the surface of the ground. His sons thought he spoke of money that he had hidden, and after he was buried, they dug most industriously all over the estate, but found nothing. The soil being so well loosened, however, the succeeding crops were unequaled in richness. The sons then found out what their father had in view of telling them to dig for hidden treasure. The moral of the story is industry is fortune's right hand. I do like the language. It's funny because it reorganizes your thoughts in a new way. Because to read it, you really kind of have to think it right. But I don't know. I think it's good for people to language shift this way. It's still English, but it's not the same English. The Sheep and the Dog. The sheep one day complained to the shepherd that while they were shorn of their fleece and their young ones often taken and killed for food, they received nothing in return but the green herbage of the earth, which grew of itself and cost him no pains to procure. On the other hand, your dog, said they, which gives no wool and is of no use for food, is petted and fed with good meat as his master. Peace, bleating simpletons, replied the dog, who overheard them. Were it not that I look after you and watch you, and keep off wolves and thieves, small good would be to you your herbage or anything else. The moral of the story is each has his allotted labor. The Travelers and the Oyster. As two men were walking by the seaside at low water, they saw an oyster and both stopped at the same time to pick it up. One pushed the other away, and a dispute ensued. A third traveler coming along at the time, they determined to refer the matter to him, which of the two had the better right to the oyster. While each was telling the story, the arbitrator gravely took out a knife, opened the shell, and loosened the oyster. When they had finished and were listening for his decision, he just as gravely swallowed the oyster and offered them each a shell. The court, he said, awards you each a shell. The oyster will cover the costs. The moral of the story is those who seek justice must pay for it. Yes, oyster. The Sportsman and the Spaniel. A sportsman ranged the field with his gun. Attended by an experienced old spaniel, he happened to spring a snipe, and, almost at the same time, a covey of partridges. Surprised at the accident and divided in his aim, he fired too indiscriminately, and by this means missed them both. "Oh, my good master," said the spaniel, you should never have two aims at once. Had you not been dazzled and seduced by the extravagant hope of bringing down a partridge, you would have probably secured your snipe. The moral is the story we often miss our point by dividing our attention. Aesop and his fellow servants. A merchant, who was at one time Aesop's master, ordered all things to be got ready for an intended journey. When the burdens were being shared among the servants, Aesop requested that he might have the lightest. He was told to choose for himself, and he took up the basket of bread. Other servants laughed, for that was the largest and heaviest of all. When dinner time came, Aesop, who had with some difficulty sustained his load, was told to distribute an equal share of bread all around. He did so, and this lightened his burden one half, and when supper time arrived, he got rid of the rest. For the remainder of the journey, he had nothing but the empty basket to carry, and the other servants, whose loads seemed to get heavier and heavier at every step, could not but applaud his ingenuity. The moral of the story is ingenuity lightens labor. The Ass's Shadow. A man, one hot day, hired an ass, with his driver, to carry some merchandise across the desert. The sun's rays were intensely hot, and unable to advance farther without temporary rest, he called upon the driver to stop and proceeded to sit down in the shadow of the ass. The driver, however, a lusty fellow, rudely pushed him away and sat down on the spot himself. Nay, friend, said the driver, when you hired this ass of me, you said nothing about the shadow. If you now want that too, you must pay for it. But the shadow goes with the ass, replied the man, and both are my property. The other disputed, and the quarrel, waxing fiercer, came to blows. While the men fought, the ass sprang to its feet and galloped away. The moral of the story is be sure of your bargains. The Old Hound. An old hound who had hunted well in his time once seized a stag, but from feebleness and the loss of his teeth was forced to let him go. The master, coming up, began to beat the old hound cruelly, but left off when the poor animal addressed him as follows. Hold, dear master, you know well that neither my courage nor my will was at fault, but only my strength and my teeth, and those I have lost in your service. The moral of the story is forget not past services. The Fortune Teller. A man who gave himself out as a wizard and fortune teller used to stand in the marketplace and pretend to foretell the future and give information to the missing property and other matters of the like kind. One day, while he was busily plying his trade, a waggish fellow broke through the crowd, gasping as if for want of breath, told him his house was in flames and must shortly be burned to the ground. Off ran the wizard at the news as fast as his legs could carry him, while the wag and a crowd of people followed at his heels. But the house was not on fire at all. The wag asked him amid the jeers of the people how it was that he, who was so clever at telling other people's fortunes, should know so little of his own. The moral of the story is 'tis a poor baker who will not eat his own wares. Okay. The Ass and His Purchaser. A man who wanted to buy an ass went to the market, and, coming across a likely-looking beast, arranged with the owner that he should be allowed to take him home on a trial to see what he was like. When he reached home, he put him into a stable along with the other asses. The newcomer took a look round and immediately went and chose a place next to the laziest and greediest beast in the stable. When the master saw this, he put a halter on him at once and led him off and handed him over to the owner again. The latter was a good deal surprised to see him back again so soon and said, Why do you mean to say you have tested him already? I don't want to put him through any more tests, replied the other. I could see what sort of beast he is from the companion he chose for himself. The moral of the story is man is known by a company he keeps. All right. The Lamb in the Temple. A wolf pursued a lamb, which fled for refuge to a certain temple. The wolf called out to him and said, The priest will slay you in a sacrifice if he should catch you. On which the lamb replied, It would be better for me to be sacrificed in the temple than to be eaten by you. The moral of this story is, 'tis better to die for a good cause than for an evil one. There's a lot of asses in these stories, if you haven't noticed. The Sensible Ass. An old fellow, in the time of war, was allowing his ass to feed in the green meadow when he was alarmed by a sudden advance of the enemy. He tried every means in his power to urge the ass to fly, but in vain. The enemy are upon us, he said. And what will the enemy do? Asked the ass. They will put 2 pairs of panniers on my back instead of 1. No, answered the man, there is no fear of that. Why then, replied the ass, I'll not stir an inch. I am born to be a slave, and my greatest enemy is he who gives me most to carry. The moral of the story is conquest has no terror for slaves. Alrighty. One moment. There we go. The three tradesmen. The citizens of a certain city were debating about the best materials to use in the fortifications which were about to be erected for the greater security of the town. A carpenter got up and advised the use of wood, which he said was readily procurable and easily worked. A stonemason objected to wood on the ground that it was so inflammable and recommended use stone instead. Then the tanner got on his legs and said, in my opinion, there's nothing like leather. The moral of the story is every man for himself. Yeah, that's for sure, Kaser. The horse and the stag. The horse, having quarreled with the stag and being unable to revenge himself upon his enemy, came to a man and begged his help. He allowed the man to saddle and bridle him, and together they ran down the stag and killed him. The horse neighed with joy, and thanking his rider warmly, asked him now to remove his saddle and let him go. No, no, said the man. You are much too useful to me as you are. The horse thenceforth served the man, and found that he had gratified his need for revenge at the cost of his liberty. The moral of the story is put bounds to your anger, or it will put bounds to you. The young man and his cat. A young man came so fond of his cat that he made her his constant companion, and used to declare that if she were a woman he would marry her. Venus, at length, seeing how sincere his affection, gratified his wishes and changed the cat into a young and beautiful woman. The young man was delighted and lost no time in marrying her. They lived happily together until one day, when the bride heard a mouse in the room. Quickly springing up, she caught the mouse and killed it. Venus, very angry at this behavior, and seeing that under the form of a woman there was still hidden the nature of a cat, determined that form and nature should no longer disagree, and changed her back into a cat. The moral of the story is true nature, though hidden, will assert itself. Plot of an anime. The ass carrying an idol. The master of an ass was employed to take an idol from the shop of the sculptor, where it was made to the temple in which it was to be placed. For this purpose, it was put on the back of an ass and carried through the principal streets of the city. Seeing all of the people as he went along bent themselves in lowly reverence, the animal fancied that it was to him they were bowing. In consequence, he pricked up his ears, flourished his tail, and felt as proud as might be. Finally, he became so vain that he stood stock still, and refused to leave his circle of supposed worshippers. The drivers, seeing him thus stop, laid the whip lustily over his body, and said, "Oh, you obstinate fool! It is not yet come to this, that men do homage to an ass." The moral of the story is, they are not wise who take themselves the credit due to others. No wonder they call women fighting, can't we? Mercury and the Traveler. A man about to depart upon a long journey prayed to the god Mercury, who was anciently supposed to speed travelers, to give him a good voyage and a safe return. He promised Mercury that, if he would grant his request, he would give the god half of everything he might find on the road. Soon after he set forth, he found a bag of dates and almonds, which some passer-bys had lost. He ate all but the stones of the dates and the shells of the almonds at once. He laid these upon a wayside altar to the guard, praying to take notice that he had kept his promise. For, said he, here are the insides of the one and the outsides of the other. That makes up your half of the booty. The moral of the story is a promise breaker is never at loss for an excuse. Oh my god. Here's another classic. The Fox and the Grapes. A hungry fox one day chanced to come into a vineyard, where he saw some fine ripe grapes hanging at a good height from the ground. He jumped at them and made many other vain attempts to reach them. Finally, he walked off, grumbling to himself, if those grapes had been good, I would be disappointed, but they are green and sour. The moral of the story is it is easy to despise what you cannot get. The Goat and the Vine. A goat was straying in a vineyard and began to browse on the tender shoots of a vine, which bore several fine bunches of grapes. What have I done to you, said the vine, that you should harm me thus? Isn't there grass enough for you to feed on? All the same, even if you eat up every leaf I have and leave me quite bare, I shall produce wine enough to pour over you when you are led to the altar to be sacrificed. The moral of the story is ill treatment invites retribution. That's weird. I can't get VR and I still want it. I think, look at the length of this one right here. I think it's probably pretty short. Yeah. So I think I'm going to go ahead and read this last one and then we'll wrap up for the night, guys. Right, Kaser? Oh my god. A wolf, a fox, or the farmer and his three enemies. A wolf, a fox, and a hare happened to be foraging one evening in different parts of a farm. Their first effort was pretty successful, and they returned in safety to their several quarters. However, not so happy as to be unperceived by the farmer's watchful eye, who, placing several kinds of snares, made each of them his prisoner in the next attempt. He first took the hare to task, who confessed she had eaten a few turnip tops merely to satisfy her hunger, besought him piteously to spare her life, and promised never to enter his grounds again. He then accosted the fox, who, in a fawning, obsequious tone, protested that he came into the premises through no other motive than pure good nature to restrain the hares and other vermin from the plunder of his corn, and that, whatever evil tongues might say, he had too great a regard for both him and justice to be in the least capable of any dishonest action. He last of all examined the wolf as to the business that brought him. The wolf boldly declared that it was with a view of destroying his lambs, to which he had an undoubted right, that the farmer himself was the only felon who robbed the community of wolves of what was meant to be their proper food. That this, at least, was his opinion, and whatever fate attended him, he should not scruple to risk his life in the pursuit of his lawful prey. The farmer, having heard their pleas, determined the cause in the following manner. The hare, he said, deserves compassion for the penitence she shows, and the humble confession she has made. As for the fox and the wolf, let them be hanged together. Their crimes deserve it, and are heightened by their hypocrisy and impudence. The moral of the story is wrongdoer can obtain forgiveness most easily by confessing his sin. All right, guys, my throat's getting a little rough, so I think it's time to call it a night. Oops. I will be on tomorrow night to play some Baldur's Gate. Saturday, we will play Frozen Flame with Darylyn. I'm not sure what we're doing Sunday. I don't know if I think he probably has D&D, and if he does, then we'll do something else on Sunday, but we'll figure that out. Monday, I will be on with my friend Starsan. Next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I will probably not be on because Wednesday I'm leaving for Wisconsin. I should be in Wisconsin on... Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, Tuesday I'm leaving for Wisconsin. I will be in Wisconsin on Wednesday. I will be attending the Nerdrotic Wisconsin meetup on Thursday, and then I will be driving back Friday and Saturday. So I will see everybody again on Sunday after that. And yeah. So not next week, but the week after, we will read The Curse of Yig. But that'll be fun. I appreciate you guys so much for being here. I hope you have a very good night, and I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Go reflect on the wisdom that has been imparted on us by Aesop and all the other fables. And I'll see you guys tomorrow night. Have some sweet dreams.